When I walked into the courtroom, my son laughed under his breath, and his wife shook her head. I heard it clear as day. That short, ugly little laugh, the kind that isn't loud, but it cuts deep. I froze for a second, right there in front of the judge's bench, clutching my tote like it was some kind of shield. It hit me all at once. This wasn't a meeting. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a hearing about me, about whether I was still capable of managing my own affairs. At 72, after raising 2 children, managing hundreds of nurses, and keeping a hospital running through every kind of crisis you can imagine, I had somehow become the joke at my own competency hearing. I looked at Richard, my only son, sitting there beside Denise. He didn't meet my eyes. His hands were folded neatly on the table, like a man trying to look respectful while doing something shameful. Denise just gave me that tight-lipped smile she always used when she thought she was the smartest one in the room. The bailiff asked me to take a seat. I did, careful not to stumble. My knees aren't what they used to be, but I still stand tall. I set my tote down beside me and folded my hands in my lap. The judge's voice was steady as he called the case. McClelland versus McClelland. Hearing my own name said twice like that felt strange, like I'd been split into 2 people. The woman who once ran the nursing staff at St. David's Hospital for 30 years, and the woman now being accused of losing her mind. Richard's attorney started speaking. Every word sounded rehearsed. Your Honor, my client is concerned for his mother's well-being. There have been several recent incidents suggesting cognitive decline, forgotten appointments, misplaced medication, and impulsive financial decisions. Impulsive financial decisions. That was his polite way of saying I'd written a few checks to local charities and to a widow in my church whose husband had passed away from pancreatic cancer. Apparently, kindness now counted as incompetence. I sat there quietly, my heart thudding, letting their words settle. I didn't interrupt. Not yet. As they spoke, I noticed Richard glance toward me once or twice, maybe checking if I was crying. I wasn't. I'd done my crying weeks ago when I first got that certified letter saying my own son was petitioning to take control of my finances for my protection. At first, I thought it had to be some mistake. Richard was always the calm one, the boy who built model airplanes at the kitchen table while his sister ran wild in the backyard. He was the one who used to bring me coffee when I worked late nights at the hospital. But that boy was gone. In his place sat a man who thought his mother's mind could be measured by a few misplaced pill bottles and a stack of signed donation checks. The lawyer kept talking, his voice smooth and professional, and Denise sat beside Richard like an eager student, nodding at every word. Her navy blazer was crisp, her nails manicured. I noticed her new bracelet, rose gold, probably expensive. I wondered if she bought it with the money from my joint account. When it was my turn to speak, my attorney leaned over and whispered, "Take your time, Naomi. You know what you're doing." I nodded. Yes, I did. I stood up slowly, facing the judge. My voice didn't shake, though my hands wanted to. "Your Honor," I said, "I may have forgotten a grocery list or 2, but I haven't forgotten who I am. I haven't forgotten how to read a balance sheet or a prescription chart or a budget. I spent 41 years managing one of the busiest departments in St. David's Hospital. I've supervised people half my age who couldn't tell a Tylenol from a tablet of iron. So forgive me if I don't take kindly to being called confused." For a second, nobody said anything. The judge looked down at his papers. Richard's lawyer cleared his throat. Denise shifted in her seat. I could almost hear their thoughts. She's too proud, too defensive. But I also saw something else flicker across my son's face. Doubt. Maybe for the first time since this started. That gave me just enough strength to hold my head a little higher. See, what Richard and Denise didn't know was that I wasn't walking into that courtroom blind. I'd been patient, watching, waiting collecting the things they thought I'd never notice. Bank transfers, emails, conversations they had when they thought I was asleep. They thought this day would break me. They thought they'd walk out with control of my life, neatly handed to them by the state. They forgot something important. I used to run a hospital. After the hearing started, I couldn't help but replay how it all began. None of this happened overnight. It crept in slow, the way most heartbreak does. 2 years ago, when Charles passed, my world went quiet. We'd been married 47 years. We met in college in Denton, built a life in Dallas, and raised our children to believe in steady work and clean consciences. When he died, the house felt too big. I sold it not because I had to, but because every corner reminded me of him. The laughter, the Sunday pancakes, even his shoes by the door. It was too much. I found a modest condo outside Austin. Nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, 1 small balcony with a view of the park. I told myself it was a new chapter. I joined a book club, volunteered at the local clinic twice a week, and kept busy. I missed Charles every single day, but I tried to fill the silence. Then came the fall. I was reaching for a box on the top shelf when the stool slipped. I only bruised my shoulder, but it scared me. Richard showed up that evening with groceries and said, "Mom, you shouldn't be climbing ladders. You need to slow down." He was gentle about it then. He offered to help with bills and online payments. "Let me set up autopay for you, Mom." He said, "You don't need to stress about due dates." It sounded kind, and I was tired of sorting envelopes. I let him take care of it. Weeks later, he mentioned combining one of my smaller accounts for easier access. I didn't think much of it. We were family. Family doesn't take advantage, right? Or, at least, that's what I used to believe. Months went by. He and Denise started stopping by less. When they did, they always seemed rushed. Denise would walk around the condo like she was inspecting it, pointing out things I should update. "Mom, you could sell this place for a profit," she said once, running her hand across the kitchen counter. It was small talk, but something about her tone made me uneasy. Then one afternoon, while sorting mail, I found a statement from the bank. My name wasn't listed alone anymore. It read, "Joint account holders, Naomi McClelland and Richard McClelland." I sat there staring at it. I didn't remember signing anything like that. I called the bank. The young woman on the phone told me the documents had been digitally approved and processed through family authorization. Family authorization. I didn't even know that was a thing. I hung up, made a cup of coffee, and tried to calm down. Maybe it was an honest mistake. Maybe I clicked something without realizing it. I wanted to believe the best. I always did. Then came the envelope. It was certified, stamped, and official looking. I remember opening it at the kitchen table, the light from the window falling across the paper. It said in the matter of Naomi McClelland, petition for guardianship, filed by Richard McClelland and Denise McClelland. For a moment, the words didn't register. I thought maybe someone was pranking me, but as I read on, my stomach turned. They claimed I had shown signs of cognitive decline, that I'd made unsound financial decisions, and that I was no longer capable of independent living. The evidence? I'd missed one HOA meeting, donated $5,000 to a local food pantry, and once called Denise twice in one day because I couldn't remember if I'd told her about my new medication. It sounds small, but when written on legal paper, it looked damning. I sat at that table for an hour, reading and rereading every line. I wasn't angry right away. I was just stunned. My own son had gone to court to take away my right to make decisions about my own life. And the worst part, there was a tiny, quiet part of me that wondered if maybe he was right. I had been forgetting things. A few weeks earlier, I drove to HEB and couldn't find where I'd parked. I stood in the lot for 10 minutes, pressing my key fob, listening for the horn. I laughed it off when I told Leah, but inside, it shook me. Then there were my pills. Once, I mixed up my calcium with my blood pressure tablets. Nothing serious happened, but it made me nervous. I started setting reminders on my phone. So when Richard said I was slipping, I couldn't say it was all lies. That's what made it sting. He took my small human moments and built a case out of them. I told Leah about the petition over the phone. She lives in Denver, and I could hear the disbelief in her voice. Mom, you can't let him do this. You need a lawyer. I don't want to fight him. I said, he's my son. But she was right. By filing that petition, Richard made it a fight whether I wanted it or not. I called an attorney the next day, a man named Henry Langston. We'd known each other back when he was a legal advisor for the hospital. He was older now, slower in his walk, but his mind was sharp. He came to my condo, sat at my table, and read the papers quietly. After a few minutes, he looked up and said, Naomi, they're trying to take your independence. We can't let that happen. He asked for every financial record I had, bank statements, medical evaluations, donation receipts. I handed them over, embarrassed at how disorganized they were. He smiled and said, Don't worry, we'll make sense of it. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly. I thought about every diaper I'd changed, every night I stayed up with Richard when he was sick, every word of encouragement I gave him when he started his own business. I thought of how proud I used to be. Now my own child was standing in front of a judge, trying to prove I couldn't think straight. It's a strange kind of pain when the person you gave life to tries to take yours apart piece by piece. I promised myself, right, then I wouldn't let shame keep me quiet. I'd face it head on. And I did. After Charles passed, Richard started acting different. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, almost polite at first. He spoke to me like I was made of glass. Every word came with a careful tone, as if I might break if he said the wrong thing. He used to call me every few days just to check in, but after the funeral, our conversations changed. They weren't about family anymore. They were about my plans, my health, my money. Mom, you shouldn't drive that far by yourself. He'd say if I mentioned visiting Leah in Denver. Or, you don't need to handle that paperwork. Denise, and I can take care of it. At first, I thought it was love. He'd lost his father too. After all, maybe he just wanted to protect me. But love doesn't sound like permission. And every time I told him I could manage something, he'd sigh the way a parent sighs at a stubborn child. Denise was worse. She was always polite on the surface, but her words had edges. You should really think about assisted living sooner rather than later, she said one evening at dinner. It's better to plan while you still can. While you still can. I remember those 4 words. They stayed with me. They started visiting less, but when they did, Denise would walk around the condo like a realtor. She'd open drawers, comment on my furniture, ask what I planned to do with all this space. It wasn't small talk. It was inventory. One Sunday afternoon, I was in the kitchen pouring tea when I heard their voices from the balcony. They thought I was in the bedroom. She's not using that condo right. Denise said if we sell it now, she'd have enough for assisted living, and the rest could be invested. Richard answered, quieter, let's just get through the hearing first. Once that's done, I can sign on her behalf. I stood there holding the teapot, my hand shaking. I didn't say a word when they came back in. Denise smiled like nothing happened, and Richard kissed my cheek before they left. I smiled back, but inside, something changed. I called Leah that night. I tried to sound calm, but she could hear it in my voice. Mom, what did they say? I told her. Every word. Leah went quiet for a moment, then said, you need to protect yourself. Start keeping records. She was always the practical one. She worked as an accountant in Denver, good with details. She told me what to do. Make copies, save emails, write down dates. So I did. It felt strange at first, like spying on my own family. But it was a revenge I wanted. It was clarity. I needed to see the truth in black and white. I went through my files one evening, pulling old bank statements and printing the ones from my online account. There were transfers I didn't recognize. A few thousand here, 10,000 there, always marked as reallocations. I made a list line by line. When I added them up, the number was bigger than I wanted to believe. A few days later, I stopped by the bank in person. I spoke with a woman named Cheryl, young, kind, probably the same age as Denise. She pulled up my profile, frowned, and said, "There's a trust account linked here. Do you want me to show you the activity?" Trust account. My heart sank. That account was supposed to be for Leah's kids, started years ago when they were born. It wasn't large, but Charles and I had added to it every Christmas. I nodded, and Cheryl printed the summary. There were withdrawals, 4 of them, each labeled as authorized transfer by co-trustee Richard McClelland. He hadn't even told me. I drove home in silence that day. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat in my car in the parking lot and stared at the dashboard, trying to understand how it had come to this. I raised that boy to be careful with money. I taught him to double-check everything before signing. And here he was, quietly signing things for me. That night, I made copies of every page. I labeled them neatly, slipped them into folders, and stored them in the filing cabinet under my birth certificate. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust. I stopped waiting for him to explain himself. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. Instead, I started reading every line of every document, every receipt, every contract. I read the fine print like it was my new job, because in a way it was. They wanted to prove I couldn't handle my affairs. Well, I was about to show them just how capable I still was. The next time Richard called, his tone was different, softer, but not the good kind. "Mom, you really don't need to stress yourself over paperwork," he said. "It's all being taken care of." I smiled into the phone. "I know, Richard," I said. "I'm just keeping copies for my records." He hesitated before hanging up. He knew I'd seen something. That was the moment I stopped being the mother he pitied and started being the woman he underestimated. And I wasn't done yet. After I found those withdrawals from the trust account, something in me woke up. The hurt didn't go away, but it settled into something quieter, focus. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a woman who needed to protect herself. I still volunteered twice a week at the State Medical Review Board in Austin. It wasn't much, mostly reading through hospital ethics cases and making recommendations. I liked the work because it kept my mind sharp. It reminded me that my judgment still mattered to someone. One afternoon, they sent me to a conference at the downtown convention center. It was mostly younger people, new nurses, and administrators with bright eyes and fast phones. I found a seat near the back, sipping my coffee while a speaker droned on about patient confidentiality. During the break, a woman walked up to me with a lanyard full of pins and a wide smile. "Naomi McClelland? From ST. David's." I nodded, a little startled. She grinned. "I'm Carla Ruiz. You probably don't remember me, but I worked nights in the emergency department back in the late 80s. You're the one who cleaned up that mess with the insurance audits in 89. We thought the whole floor would get shut down, but you fixed it in a week." I laughed, half embarrassed, half touched. "I just did my job, Carla." She shook her head. "You did more than that. You were tough but fair. You always had a plan." Her words stayed with me long after she left. You always had a plan. It had been a long time since anyone described me that way. Somewhere between grief, downsizing, and letting others handle things, I'd forgotten who I used to be, the woman who ran a department full of doctors and nurses, the one people came to when chaos broke out. Driving home that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while, clarity. The next morning, I called Henry Langston. He was retired now, but he'd stayed in touch with a few old hospital colleagues. When I told him what was happening, he didn't sound surprised. "This happens more than you'd think," he said. "Family thinks they're doing you a favor, and before you know it, they've got the keys to your whole life." "I'm not going to let that happen," I told him. "Good," he said. "Then we'll do it the right way." Quietly. We started by organizing everything. I brought over boxes of papers, statements, letters, receipts. Henry looked through each one carefully. He had a small office behind his house, filled with old books and the smell of coffee. He made copies of the account records and highlighted every transaction Richard made. Then he asked me to check my medical history. "They'll use your health against you," he warned. I called my doctor, scheduled a cognitive exam, and passed it without trouble. The results were clear: no signs of dementia, no cognitive decline. I asked for 2 certified copies. Henry smiled when I handed them over. "That's your shield," he said. "Now let's find your sword." We went through my emails next. I'd never deleted much, and it turned out that was a blessing. There were notes from Denise reminding Richard about timelines and deadlines. One message caught Henry's attention. Denise had written, "We need to file before your mom changes her will again. The trust money is better secured if the judge sees her as unstable." I stared at the screen for a long moment. My stomach turned. "Can we use that?" I asked. He nodded. "It's evidence of motive." We printed every email that mattered and stored them in labeled folders. I kept 1 copy in my condo and gave Henry the other set for safekeeping. As the weeks passed, I started feeling like myself again. I cooked more. I walked around the park every morning, and when I saw Richard's name pop up on my phone, I didn't feel dread. I felt control. He'd call to check in, but every question had a purpose. "Did you pay that bill yet? Have you thought about moving closer to us?" Each time, I answered calmly and briefly. I didn't argue. I wanted him to think I was still the same trusting mother. Meanwhile, Henry prepared the legal response to their petition. He filed a motion requiring proof of their financial management and a review of any transactions done under my name. That, he said, would keep them from making sudden moves before the hearing. At night, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea, going through notes. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. One evening, Leah called. She could hear the difference in my voice right away. "You sound like Mom again," she said. "I feel like her." I told her, "I'm not waiting for them to fix this. I'm fixing it myself." We talked for an hour about everything: Richard, the hearing, the trust account. Leah promised she'd fly in for the court date. After the call, I sat quietly in the dark living room. The house was peaceful, but my mind was sharp, alert. For months, I'd been treated like someone fragile, someone fading. Now, I was the one quietly pulling the strings. The next morning, I stopped by the courthouse to check on filing dates. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, looked at the paperwork and said, "Ma'am, you're well prepared." I smiled. "Old habit," I said. "I used to run a hospital." By the time I walked back to my car, the fear that had once kept me up at night was gone. I knew what was coming. Richard and Denise thought they were in control, but they had no idea how much I'd learned. They were about to find out the hard way that I hadn't lost my mind. I'd simply remembered who I was. The courtroom air felt heavier that morning than it had during any hospital shift I'd ever worked. I'd faced families yelling at me, doctors disagreeing in front of patients, and nights when the ER ran on fumes. But nothing compared to sitting across from my own son, waiting for him to call me unfit. Judge Harmon adjusted his glasses and looked at the paperwork before him. McClelland versus McClelland, he said again, as if the words tasted strange. Then he nodded toward Richard's lawyer. You may proceed. The man stood up, buttoned his jacket, and spoke with that practiced calm lawyers use when they believe they've already won. Your Honor, this is not an act of cruelty. My client only wishes to protect his mother. He has observed troubling behavior, forgotten property tax payments, confusion about medication schedules, and substantial donations made without oversight. These are not isolated incidents. They are patterns. He turned toward me, his expression full of polite concern. Mrs. McClelland, this petition isn't about taking anything away from you. It's about ensuring your well-being. I stayed silent. Henry Langston had told me to. Let them paint their picture, he'd said. Then we'll hang it straight. Richard sat next to the lawyer, hands folded, face serious. Denise was behind him, whispering notes, pretending to be the supportive wife. I caught her, watching me the way a hawk watches a rabbit. The lawyer continued, listing examples. The time I misplaced my insurance card. The time I forgot my debit PIN. The time I donated $10,000 to a charity that helps widows with medical bills. Each moment was twisted into proof of decline. It wasn't lies. It was worse. It was half-truths. Every story he told had a kernel of reality wrapped in a layer of insult. I had mixed up my insurance cards. Yes, but it was because they'd sent a replacement in the mail and canceled the old one without telling me. I had forgotten my debit PIN because the bank changed it after they added Richard to the account. And the donation? I'd written that check with full intention. Still, I stayed quiet. I folded my hands and listened to my own life being turned into a case file. When the lawyer sat down, Henry rose slowly. He didn't rush. He had that old-school patience that made people listen. Your Honor, he began, before I respond, I'd like to submit several documents for the record. He walked to the clerk's desk and handed over a folder thick enough to make the attorney frown. These, he said, are recent work evaluations from the Texas State Medical Review Board. My client, Mrs. McClelland, volunteers as an ethics consultant. Her reports are meticulous, timely, and detailed. Each one is signed by the board director and dated this year. The judge flipped through the papers, adjusting his glasses again. These are impressive, he said. She's still active? Very much so, Henry replied. She reads case files, analyzes hospital conduct, and advises on policy. That's not something a confused or impulsive person can do. I saw Richard shift in his seat. Denise's hand froze mid-note. Henry continued, his tone calm but sharp. And about those supposed lapses, property taxes were paid 2 weeks late due to the bank's transfer delays. The charity donations were documented, transparent, and within her legal right. There's no pattern of decline here, only a pattern of independence being redefined as instability. He paused for a moment, then turned toward me. Mrs. McClelland, would you hand me the envelope we discussed? I reached into my tote and passed it to him. Inside was a sealed, notarized statement from my neurologist, Dr. Patel. It confirmed what I already knew, but what the court needed to see. No cognitive impairment, no neurological disorder, no dementia. Henry presented it to the judge. Your Honor, this report is recent, signed just 3 weeks ago. The judge scanned it for a full minute, silent except for the rustle of paper. Then he looked over his glasses at Richard's lawyer. Do you have any evidence that contradicts this medical opinion? The lawyer hesitated. Not at this time, Your Honor. The room went quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. I watched Richard's face lose its confidence. Denise crossed her arms and looked away. Henry leaned on the table slightly, his voice steady. This case isn't about mental decline. It's about control. My client's only mistake was trusting her son and daughter-in-law to manage small details of her finances. When she began asking questions, they chose to silence her by using the courts. That, Your Honor, is not protection. That's possession. I'll never forget the way Judge Harmon looked at me then. Not with pity, but with curiosity. Mrs. McClelland, he said, is there anything you'd like to say? I stood, slow but steady. My voice was even. Yes, Your Honor. I love my son. I raised him to be careful, honest, and decent. But love doesn't mean I hand over my life like a set of keys. I may be older, but I'm not broken. I still pay my bills. I still volunteer. And I still know right from wrong. I didn't say more than that. I didn't need to. The judge nodded. Thank you, Mrs. McClelland. Richard leaned forward as if he wanted to speak, but the judge raised a hand. I've heard enough for now. The silence that followed felt like the longest minute of my life. Then, with a soft sigh, Judge Harmon closed the folder. Given the evidence presented, he said, I see no grounds for a guardianship at this time. Petition denied. It was simple, almost casual, but it landed like thunder in my chest. Richard's lawyer tried to protest. Your Honor, if we could. The judge cut him off. No further arguments. This matter is closed. Henry reached over and squeezed my hand once. You did good, he whispered. As I gathered my tote, I looked at Richard. He couldn't meet my eyes. Denise stared down at her phone, pretending to check a message that wasn't there. Walking out of that courtroom, my legs trembled, but not from fear. It was relief, sharp and clean. They had tried to take my life apart piece by piece, and I'd put it back together right in front of them. For the first time in a long time, I felt like Naomi again. When the judge said the petition was denied, I thought that was the end. But it wasn't. He asked me to give my own statement, something that would be part of the record. I stood again, hands steady on the table. My voice came out calm, the way it used to when I had to speak in front of a room full of hospital staff. Your Honor, I'm not perfect. I forget things sometimes. I write notes on sticky pads, I keep lists on my fridge, and I use the reminders on my phone. That's not confusion. That's being 72 and organized. I took a breath. I keep a strict routine. I wake up at 6. I walk around the park across from my condo. I read the paper, eat oatmeal, and volunteer at the state board twice a week. I still balance my own checkbook. And yes, sometimes I misplace it, but I always find it again. The courtroom was quiet. Even the bailiff stopped fiddling with his papers. I've given to charities since I was 22. I said, it's part of who I am. If generosity is now considered a symptom of decline, then I suppose we're all in trouble. The judge almost smiled at that. Then I turned toward Richard and Denise. Not angry, not dramatic, just steady. I know my son believes he was helping me, but help isn't help when it takes away choice. And I didn't give anyone permission to decide my life for me. Henry nodded at me to continue. There's one more thing, I said, reaching into my tote. I handed a folder to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. Those are emails and text messages between my son and his wife. I didn't want to share them, but they're part of the truth. Richard's head snapped up. Denise froze. The judge adjusted his glasses and read silently. His brow furrowed. Then he read one line out loud. We should move before she changes her will again. Once the court grants control, it's clean. No one spoke. You could have heard a pin drop. He turned another page and read another line. We can streamline her assets once guardianship is approved. It'll make things easier for us long term. Richard sank back into his chair. Denise stared at the floor. The judge set the papers down and looked at them both. Is this accurate? Neither of them answered. He repeated, slower this time. Are these messages legitimate? Richard finally nodded. Yes, Your Honor. His voice was low, almost a whisper. But we didn't mean... The judge held up a hand. I've heard enough. Then he looked back at me. Mrs. McClelland, you've shown exceptional clarity today. I see no evidence of incapacity. In fact, I see someone who's been far too trusting. That last line hit home. He was right. The courtroom stayed silent for what felt like a long time. The judge signed the final document and handed it to the clerk. This petition is officially dismissed. Mrs. McClelland retains full control of her estate and affairs. I nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. My voice didn't shake. Henry began gathering the papers, but I just stood there, letting the words sink in. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired and free. When it was over, I turned to leave. I didn't look back at Richard or Denise. Some moments don't need a grand ending. They just need closure. Outside, the sun was bright against the courthouse steps. I stopped halfway down, took a deep breath, and felt the weight lift. For the first time in months, I could breathe without fear sitting on my chest. Henry caught up to me. You handled that beautifully, he said. I only told the truth, I answered. Sometimes that's all you need. He smiled. You've still got that old administrator tone. I laughed softly. Old habits die hard. We parted ways in the parking lot. I sat in my car for a while, watching people come and go, families, couples, strangers. Everyone looked busy, caught up in their own worries. I wondered how many of them had been betrayed by someone they trusted. When I finally drove home, the city looked different. The same roads, same traffic lights, but everything felt lighter. My condo wasn't just a place anymore. It was mine again. I made a cup of tea, sat on the couch, and looked at the framed photo of Charles on the bookshelf. I spoke out loud, though no one was there to hear. You were right, I said. It's always the ones closest who can hurt you most. For a moment, I thought about calling Richard, but I didn't. Not yet. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. That night, I opened the folder again and reread everything. The evaluations, the emails, the court decision. I didn't do it to gloat. I did it to remember, because forgetting how I got here would be the real loss. I put everything back, neatly labeled the file, and slid it into my cabinet. Then I took out a blank page and wrote one new note at the top. Never hand over control out of convenience. The next morning, I went for my usual walk. The park was quiet, the sun just rising. I passed a young woman pushing a stroller. She smiled at me and said, "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It is," I said, smiling back. "It really is." As I kept walking, I thought about what had happened. It wasn't just about winning. It was about remembering that even when life tries to shrink you down, you still get to decide who you are. By the time I reached home, the fear that had lived in my chest for months was gone. I wasn't the victim of a hearing anymore. I was Naomi McClelland, still standing, still sharp, and still in charge of my own life. When I walked back into my condo that evening, the quiet felt different. For months, it had felt like loneliness. Now it felt like peace. The shadows on the walls weren't heavy anymore. I set my tote on the counter and stood in the kitchen, just breathing. No one could take that from me. I made tea the same way I always did. 1 spoon of honey, a slice of lemon. Simple, steady, familiar. I sat at the table, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to double-check anything. The papers were filed, the hearing was over, and my life was still mine. But peace doesn't erase sadness. It just sits beside it. The next few days passed quietly. The neighbors waved when I went for my walk, the way they always did. I volunteered, sent thank you notes to Henry and to my doctor, and cleaned out the old folders I didn't need anymore. Richard didn't call. Denise didn't either. Leah called every evening for a week straight. She wanted to make sure I was sleeping, eating, not stewing in anger. I told her I was fine, and I was mostly, but every now and then, when the house got still, I thought about the look on Richard's face when the judge read those emails. I'd raised that man. I'd taught him to tell the truth, to be decent. And seeing him so ashamed made my heart ache more than any betrayal ever could. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want an apology. I just wanted to understand why. 3 months later, he showed up. It was a Saturday afternoon in early spring. I was sitting on the porch with a crossword puzzle when I saw his car pull up. Denise wasn't with him. He stood on the walkway for a moment before walking up the steps. His hands were in his pockets like a boy waiting outside the principal's office. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. I nodded. "Hi, Richard." He looked thinner, tired. "Can I come in?" "Of course." I stepped aside and motioned toward the kitchen table. He didn't sit right away. He walked around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. "You changed the curtains," he said. "I did," I replied. Thought it was time. Finally, he sat down and folded his hands on the table. "I owe you an apology." I didn't say anything. I waited. He sighed. "I thought I was helping. After Dad died, I got scared. You were living alone, and I kept thinking something bad would happen. And I wouldn't know. Denise said taking control would make things easier. I didn't realize how wrong it was until that day in court. I watched him while he spoke. His voice shook a little near the end. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said. You didn't trust me. I finished." He nodded slowly. "I didn't. That was the truth. Simple, plain, and hard." We sat there for a while, without speaking. The clock ticked in the background, and the smell of coffee filled the space between us. Finally, I said, "You can't fix what you did with words, Richard. But I appreciate that you came." He nodded. "I understand." "I forgive you," I said, "but I can't go back to how things were. I have to protect my boundaries now. You and Denise will have to respect that." "I will," he said. "She and we've been arguing a lot since the hearing. She thought I should still push for guardianship. I told her I was done. I didn't say anything. Some silences are better left untouched." Before he left, he reached into his pocket and placed a small envelope on the table. "It's a check," he said, "for the money I moved. It's not everything yet, but it's a start." I didn't pick it up. "You keep it for now," I said. "Pay back what you owe the kids' trust first. Then we'll talk." He nodded again, tears in his eyes. "Okay." When he left, I stood at the window and watched his car disappear down the street. My heart felt heavy, but not bitter. Sometimes letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about refusing to let the pain own you. A few weeks later, I met with Henry again. We went over everything one last time. I told him I was setting up a new fund, a small scholarship for retired nurses who wanted to mentor new ones. "I don't need all this money sitting around," I said. "Might as well let it help somebody." Henry smiled. "That sounds like you, Naomi." "It sounds like who I used to be," I said. "I want to get back to her." And little by little, I did. The seasons turned, and the quiet in my condo became comfortable again. I started hosting small dinners for my neighbors. I joined a community choir. Leah visited that Thanksgiving, and we cooked together just like old times. Turkey, dressing, sweet potatoes, the whole spread. That evening, after we cleaned up, we sat on the balcony looking out over the Austin skyline. The city lights shimmered like small stars in the distance. Leah handed me a blanket and said, "You did good, Mom. You handled all of it with more grace than I ever could have." I smiled. Grace comes with practice. She laughed softly. "Do you think you and Richard will ever be close again?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe in time. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it just means peace." We sat in silence for a while, watching the lights flicker. I thought about Charles, about the life we built, about the children we raised. Love doesn't disappear when it's tested. It just changes shape. Before Leah went to bed, she hugged me tight. "I'm proud of you, Mom." "Thank you," I whispered. "I'm proud of me too." That night, I stood by the window and looked out at the city again. Winning hadn't felt like victory. It felt like calm, like taking back a piece of myself that had been missing. I'd learned something important through all of it. Independence isn't just about paying your own bills or living alone. It's about knowing your worth, even when the people you love forget it. As I turned off the lights, I said quietly to myself, sometimes winning doesn't feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like peace. And that peace, I learned, is worth fighting for. I used to think getting older meant giving things up, control, energy, freedom. I thought it was a slow letting go of the life you built. But I was wrong. Aging isn't about losing control. It's about learning where to place your trust and when to take it back. When I stood in that courtroom and heard my own son question my mind, I felt something break inside me. Not anger, not shame, just the quiet shock of realizing that love can twist itself into fear. He didn't mean to hurt me, but fear made him think I needed rescuing from a life I was still perfectly capable of living. What I've learned since then is that trust is a choice you keep remaking. You can't hold it too tight, but you can't hand it out carelessly either. It's like tending a garden. You water it, you protect it, but sometimes you have to cut back the parts that grow wild before they choke the rest. Now, my days are peaceful. I still volunteer at the review board, still walk the park every morning, still drink my tea at the same table. The same routines, but with a stronger spine behind them. When people offer to help, I smile and say, "I'll let you know if I need it." Leah calls often. Richard checks in too now. Though our conversations are different, short, honest, without the unspoken battle underneath. Denise doesn't call, and that's fine. Not every relationship needs fixing. Some just need distance. I've kept my promise to myself. I stay organized. I keep copies of everything. And I talk openly with my friends about what happened, because too many women my age stay quiet when someone tries to take their voice away. If you're listening to me right now, I want you to think about this. If someone you love doubted your mind, how far would you go to prove your heart still knows the truth? Would you let them define you, or would you stand up, even if your voice shakes a little? We spend our whole lives teaching our children how to be strong. But maybe the hardest lesson is showing them that their parents are strong too. Sometimes strength looks like standing in a courtroom, calm and steady, while the people you love misunderstand you. Sometimes it's just saying, "No, I'm still here. I know who I am. I don't regret what happened. It hurt, but it woke me up. It reminded me that independence isn't a gift, it's a practice. You earn it every day by showing up for yourself, even when others think you can't." As for me, I've made peace with it all. I don't dwell on what I lost. I focus on what I still have, clarity, calm, and the ability to decide how my story ends. So if you're out there listening and you've ever felt underestimated, remember this: you are not invisible. You are not fragile. You've simply lived long enough to know that strength doesn't need to shout to be real. Now, before you go, I want to thank you for spending this time with me. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own strength or made you think about trust in a new way, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel. Your story might be different from mine, but your voice still matters. Lastly, remember to download this wonderful book called Healthy Boundaries After 60. How to set strong boundaries, saying no with grace, protecting your peace, and strengthening relationship with your children. You'll find it in the pinned comment below. Now, if you like this story, go ahead and click on the next video appearing on your screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and revolt like you've never seen before on her Kindle Stories.